If Ukraine enters negotiations right now, would it be possible for Ukraine to negotiate from a position of strength? And can the United States help Ukraine to negotiate with an upper hand?
Well, in fact, my preference would be that we would have provided so much support over the last year or so that Ukraine would be in a position of strength, which I would describe as stopping the Russian incremental gains on a daily basis. They're small, but over time they accumulate a bit. They're not even operationally significant, much less strategically, but again, it does continue, despite colossal losses that Ukrainian forces are inflicting on the Russians. A lot of this increasingly through advanced unmanned systems in which Ukraine now is leading the world in many respects. But again, we didn't quite provide that amount, and there was a gap because of the debate in our House of Representatives that I felt was much too long. So there is still the incremental seizure of Ukrainian territory. There's still the occupation of some 20%. And I wish that was not the case, but there's a lot still and very much in the pipeline. I talked to the general who oversees this for the United States, also talked to the Ministry of Defense today, having met Minister Umerov in Munich earlier this week.
And what should be done from the United States government by the US to help Ukraine to have an upper hand, to negotiate from a position of strength?
Well, all of the countries supporting Ukraine should dig down again and provide additional support and assistance. Again, as I mentioned, the U.S. still has a very considerable amount, as we say, in the pipeline. It's literally flowing. Keeping in mind that some of this now, we don't just take stocks off the shelf and give it to Ukraine. Now we're actually having to have it produced because we've gone through some of the reserves of particular munitions and particular weapon systems. So that just does take time. But again, what was interesting is that at the Munich Security Conference, I detected a seriousness of purpose among the Europeans that has seldom been present since the end of the Cold War. A combination of Vladimir Putin on the one hand threatening them, and then Donald Trump pushing them very hard, challenging them to come up with more support. That has actually produced more support. And of course, Putin, ironically, in setting out to make Russia great again, has actually made NATO great again, including pushing two historically neutral countries, Finland and Sweden, to seek alliance membership, and have now joined it as well, of course.
And also, yes, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that he was convinced that Russia would like to end this war, would like to take serious actions towards the end of this conflict. However, NBC News recently reported that US intelligence community is not really sure about this fact, because they do not have any kind of intelligence about Russia's willingness to reach a serious peace deal. Do you feel that Vladimir Putin now would like and is ready to reach any kind of a serious peace deal or a serious ceasefire?
Well, I'm hopeful that our Secretary of State is right, actually. But this has all happened so quickly. Again, keep in mind, this administration's not even been in office a month. And again, President Trump has had a catalytic effect on this. In fact, General Kellogg said at one moment on stage in Munich that he's on Trump time. It's not days and weeks and months, that there's a real hard push coming from the White House. And we'll see if that is enough to galvanize the whole process. Because I'm not certain that Putin sees this as a situation that he cannot continue. I've had assessments from various governmental organizations and leaders here, and we're not convinced that Putin doesn't think that he can't still just keep on going, despite the horrific losses. Again, to someone who almost every night that I was privileged to command in combat, and I had 5 combat commands as a general officer, was writing letters of condolence to America's mothers and fathers. I don't know how Putin can even sleep through the night, given the colossal loss. Again, we're talking about 800,000 Russians who have been killed and wounded, and about 500,000 of them, so all but 3,000, have not been able to return to the front lines. They've been killed or so seriously wounded they can't be patched up and sent back to the front lines. This is so many, many times magnitude greater than the magnitude of what they lost in a decade or so in Afghanistan. It dwarfs almost all their previous post-World War II endeavors. And again, this is why, frankly, when you also consider the losses on the Ukrainian side, and I walked by that wall, not far from here, in fact, again, which has the faces and names and little tiny shrines and so forth from family members of all that those Ukrainians lost. I can absolutely embrace President Trump's desire to end this war. The question is, what will the terms be that Vladimir Putin might agree to, and what will the security guarantee consist of? And that is absolutely all important. We cannot just allow Putin to take a knee, if you will, metaphorically speaking, to take a pause and rebuild his forces and manufacture new tanks and armored personnel carriers and aircraft and so forth. This has to stop, and it has to stop forever. And again, I wish it was stopping with Ukraine having liberated all of its territory. Tragically, that is not a realistic aspiration at this moment, although I think it is realistic to hope that as part of the process, the U.S. will provide more for Ukraine, Europeans will come through and provide more for Ukraine, and that there can be a force assembled that can perform whatever tasks are required should there be a violation of the ceasefire by Russia.
You just mentioned about the peacekeeping forces, this big idea about deploying to the front lines peacekeeping mission. The United Kingdom, France, and other allies have already expressed their willingness to deploy forces to Ukraine in case of a ceasefire deal, but President Trump seems to be unwilling to deploy American boots on the ground. Would it be possible for European allies to conduct this mission, and could this mission be credible without American boots on the ground?
Well, first of all, I don't think it should be called a peacekeeping force. If Russia stops shooting at Ukraine and stops the ground attacks, peace is going to break out very quickly, and Ukrainian security forces of all different types are more than capable of maintaining the peace. So this is not Bosnia, and I spent a year in Bosnia or Haiti or some other locations where you really needed a force to come in with real muscle to ensure that the different warring factions, in Bosnia, of course, there were three major groups that had been fighting each other. You don't need that here. Again, Ukrainian police, security, and other forces can more than handle that task. What you do need is a capability to validate or identify a ceasefire violation, and then you need a force that can respond appropriately as a result of that action. I don't even think you actually have to have boots on the ground to verify a violation. I think we can do that with an architecture of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance platforms and capabilities. You can argue that it would be nice to have a force on the ground in Ukraine, although there's some arguments against that, such as getting involved in direct fighting that just can escalate you don't know where. So I think first and foremost, there has to be a determination of what will the political authority be, which countries will participate. I'd love to see a U.S. general officer commanding it, dual-hatted as a NATO commander and a U.S. commander. And again, as a 1-star, 3-star, 4-star in combat, I held dual positions. I'd like to see that in this case. I'd like to see the U.S. be the foundation of the organization, all of which is very possible without U.S. boots on the ground. In fact, I can make a case again for why you may well not want to do that. But of course, first and foremost, again, what is the mission of that force? It's what a military commander will We'll ask what are the conditions that have to be met to take the action that is contemplated. And I'd also note that the response to a ceasefire violation by Russia should include not just military action. It should include seizure of the $300 billion of frozen assets in European banks. It could include a path to NATO for Ukraine, which probably won't be allowed as part of the agreement. It could include imposition of harsher sanctions, diplomatic actions. There's quite a menu of actions that should be part of the response, not just, again, military. But again, there's endless details. Every conceivable action has to be considered and in advance so that a violation of the ceasefire from Belarus, an ambiguous situation, and you know the Russians are very good at taking action that is either unattributed or ambiguous or difficult to deal with by the other side. So there's going to have to be a huge amount of serious thinking, serious conceptual work, and then, of course, determining which countries will be part of this, who would lead it, what would be it's ideal if you have an existing headquarters on which you can build the NATO structure or the probably multinational force structure if maybe one of the NATO countries doesn't approve this. But that's an awful lot of details there. The key is that the security guarantee has to be absolute, and it has to be so much so that it provides for an enduring, a durable peace, a durable ceasefire, if you will. That is the key. And Ukraine, understandably, has to really insist on that. And I'm hoping that there's somewhat back and forth between some Americans and President Zelensky and so forth, that this kind of stuff can be, we obviously need to work together. We all have a common goal here, which is to absolutely stop the killing and destruction. And there will be lots of other elements in this. But at the end of the day, perhaps because I look at things through a military lens, the security guarantee is the most important component.
And how can the US provide Ukraine with security guarantees if the White House excludes deploying troops or any kind of participation in these efforts?
Well, they haven't said that. What I've heard is that they don't want to have troops on the ground. You can make an argument for boots on the ground. Frankly, I think you can make one against boots on the ground as well. What you need are capabilities. And those capabilities don't have to be on Ukrainian soil. As I said, you can have the monitoring aspect of this in the sky. Intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance platforms, capabilities of various types. Great liaison with the Ukrainians who are on the front lines. But the response capability doesn't have to be on Ukrainian soil. It could be in neighboring countries. It can be a surface to surface. It could be an air to ground. There's a lot of options that can be explored, examined for comprising the response, which is really the particular key. Noting again that it should not just be purely military. It should also be financial, economic, diplomatic, and so forth. So again, I think boots on the ground is what we used to do in the Cold War when we didn't have all the capabilities that we have now. In fact, as a young lieutenant in an airborne battalion, our mission was to jump into eastern Turkey and some other locations where the Soviets might attack and there weren't boots on the ground, and we would be the boots on the ground to make sure, frankly, that some of us are going to get killed and ensure that the U.S. actually honors its Article 5 commitment, I guess. I was a little bit below the strategic level in those days, and I was ready to do this. You don't have to do that in this case. And again, you can make an argument that you don't want the boots on the ground so that you get into some kind of conflict and it gets very, very confusing very quickly. the Ukrainians have plenty of boots on the ground. They have plenty of capability, and we should augment that capability even further. So there's no question about Ukrainian capability, but the security guarantee is the key, and that can be provided, again, from soil outside of Ukraine, and just has to have the range or whatever the capability that is desired for the military component of the security guarantee, of the security response, really.
Also, the United Kingdom is ready to deploy Typhoon jets to Ukraine to properly patrol this area of a ceasefire, if there is a ceasefire deal. Do you feel that the US should also commit its air power to such mission?
Yeah, I think it should have air power. I don't know that it has to be based in Ukraine. Yes, so the answer is yes, have air power that can contribute and perhaps be a very substantial part of the, as I said, again, surface to surface and air to ground. But you don't have to be based in Ukraine to do that.
For example, in Poland.
Eastern Europe, Baltic states, take your pick.
And from your perspective, what should be the main elements of such mission, and what kind of elements could help this mission to deter another Russia's attack in the future?
I think I've described those pretty clearly. Again, there has to be a military kinetic component of laid out the options that you could employ. And then there should be the other components, the financial, the economic, the diplomatic.
US President Donald Trump said that Ukraine could have made a deal earlier. What is your reaction to this? Then don't you feel that earlier Ukraine had a not really strong position to negotiate a deal?
My recollection is that there was an offer that would have assuaged Russia's concerns, could have included, for example, a pledge not to join NATO for a certain number of years or so. There was an effort to negotiate, but it was very clear to everyone at that time, including the intelligence agencies, that Putin was intent on attacking Ukraine. And he thought that he could, within a week or so, take Kyiv, replace President Zelensky with a figure who would be a Russian puppet, and go home to a victory parade. And he obviously dramatically underestimated the capabilities of Ukrainian professional and reserve and National Guard forces, the creativity, the tenacity, the courage, the innovativeness, all of these qualities, I think he clearly did not appreciate. And he also obviously overestimated enormously the professional qualities of his own force, which did not appear to me to be at all well trained, not that well equipped. Remember, the radios were interesting. We have radios that operate on FM, so it doesn't broadcast that widely. The communications are encrypted and frequency hopping. So even if you can find it briefly, you can't keep up or know where it went. The Russians have none of that. They were on HF, which broadcasts very widely, single channel, unencrypted. So any Ukrainian with a police scanner can find that, lock onto it. If they're saying bad things about their officers, you record it and then put it on social media, and then you just jam it by transmitting on top of it. And you'll recall then the Russians tried to use cell phones, and then the Ukrainians shut off access of Russian cell phone numbers to the telecom system. Then they stole Ukrainian iPhones, and then the Ukrainians used Find My iPhone and actually shot at him. So again, it was really very, very unimpressive at the outset. But to be fair, despite all the incredible qualities of Ukraine's leadership, starting at the very top and continuing all the way down to the junior soldiers, Ukraine is heavily outgunned and it's heavily outmanned.
U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth ruled out membership in NATO for Ukraine. some people see this as concessions to Putin even before the beginning of negotiations. What is your reaction to this?
Well, my reaction is actually to point out that the day after that, he walked all of that back, as we say, and stated that the negotiators would not include him, but would be Secretary of State Rubio, National Security Advisor Waltz, and Special Envoy Witkoff.
Thank you, General Petraeus, for your time and for your support for
Good to be with you
Ukraine,
again.
and glory to Ukraine.
Glory to Ukraine, Slava Ukraine. Thanks, Dan.
Slava, thank you.